Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this COVIDSafe legal compliance webinar run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at Kaizen Synergy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session specifically focuses upon COVIDSafe legal events and classes, specifically where your agency is actually delivering services to groups of clients and unpacking what these types of services actually are. So with it, let's move forwards around the specific legal compliance obligations. I am going to give you some case studies of what agencies have done, how they have met these obligations, and what to actually look like and do. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar and recorded, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So let's have a look at today's agenda. We are going to be looking through and unpacking some of the A to Z checklists around the legal requirements for COVID-safe events. We're going to look at what do you need to do in terms of informing clients about their vaccination status. We're going to unpack some of the privacy and work health and safety obligations. We're also going to look at what other agencies are doing in terms of meeting their legal compliance obligations as things unfold around Australia based on existing roadmaps. We're also going to look at whether there's a difference between running group sessions of, when I say one to 5, 10 or 100 people, and what that actually does look like for yourselves as well. So let's have a look at some of the recommendations straight up that we're going to make. Essentially, we're going to be looking at screening registers for clients. We're going to be exploring staff vaccination registers. We're going to be looking at client assessment policies, risk assessments, as well as also covering some of our previous arrangements, that previous webinars where we've spoken about service agreements with contractors and the likes as well too. If you do have any questions, you can obviously use the chat group as well too. I can see that we've still got a couple of people jumping in at the moment as well too. And hopefully I've seen that Kimberly has also jumped in and just asked if the volume has been adjusted, which we have as well too. Kimberly, welcome aboard again. So with it, certainly if you do have any questions, use the chat group that we will continue to link in as we go through today's session. Also, if you do have any questions after today's session, by all means, please reach out to us directly on our 1300 360 360 number, or you can email our support desk at support@gemba360.com. My mobile number is also directly listed here. We have been running these sessions since February last year, these open public legal compliance sessions since February last year, and they are available as well too online, which I will come to. So when we talk of group events and classes, specifically in the community services sector, we do want to make sure that we're all working off the same definitions. Unlike financial institutions, banking industry, for example, and the likes, when we talk of community service agencies, we are looking at community-based events. It might be stall owners, it might be as part of a market that you're looking to run, it might be that you're a mental health or women's refuge type of service. It might also be a church that is also looking to reopen as part of its congregations that are run on Sunday, or even pastoral team meetings. If you're running outreach work, it could also include client visits to residential sites, or equally where you are running mental health or refuge type of services where people are coming onto your properties or sites to have group sessions as well. When we talk of group classes, some of these agencies that we have provided advice to also included transport to and from those group sessions as well. So really, we've divided them into three specific three specific areas that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at providing some checklists around this and also some workflow diagrams for you as well too, to unpack some of these areas that you need to consider as well. Also, if you're a community health service or even a PHN agency, then again, these are the types of services that you'll be looking to work with other agencies on in terms of delivering services, particularly as roadmaps reopen. So if you're hosting a COVIDSafe event, really event organizers should monitor the list of approved COVIDSafe industry plans above to determine whether their event is covered by one or the specific COVIDSafe requirements. Now, in saying that, there is a lot of information out there, and to the point where a lot of information becomes just so overwhelming because you're unsure of not only what is the public health guideline that you need to follow, but also what are the work health and safety obligations in terms of informing clients about privacy issues, all kinds of things that your agency does need to consider as well too. So let's just go through these and summarize some of these down into a few slides about where we are heading. We are running a series of webinars and over the next few weeks, and some of these will look at roadmaps and operational requirements as well. But let's put this into context of what we are looking at. Even though the media and the governments are talking about the roadmaps, we can see WA's roadmap and some of the other COVID-safe plans on this slide. But essentially, after hitting this 80% vaccination, it still means that 20% of the population may well be partially not vaccinated or exempt, leaving some of about 5.1 million people out there. So what does this mean to agencies? Well, specifically for community service organisations, we've found that a lot of these what I'll call remaining population groups that may be partially not vaccinated or exempt could well fall into vulnerable communities. We're seeing that in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, where the vaccination rates are a lot lower. We're seeing that in some non-English speaking backgrounds as well too. And also people that may be vulnerable population groups. For example, clearly minors will fall into this as well too, but also people that may need refuge and support services as well too, including the homeless and also women's support services under alcohol, domestic violence type of services. So essentially, if we're going to look at this in 3 slides before going deeper down into it, what we will look at is essentially a legal pathway that covers the types of group classes that your agency needs to look at, but also what are the requirements of each step in terms of where and what do you need to do. So we're going to start in the top left-hand corner and essentially go through, does your event or community class meet the COVID-safe public requirements at the moment under the public health directives? If it doesn't, then we're going to step through this. So essentially, we're going to look at this flow chart as we go through today. And we're also going to unpack as we go through the public health directives. We're going to look at privacy, work health and safety, as well as other legislation that comes into it. When we talk of privacy, for example, and health records, again, we're going to start to look at whether you should be collecting vaccination status for people that you're delivering services to. And this has been a really big discussion topic that we've had with a lot of agencies. And the reason being, essentially, on one hand, in some states, the governments have required that people actually record a client's vaccination status, and essentially asking if they're not vaccinated, that they shouldn't be getting a service. But in community service organisations, clearly, when you have vulnerable population groups, they may well not have had either the opportunity to have the vaccine, or they may have been prevented as well too, or they also need further information due to health literacy challenges that they've had as well too. So we'll cover those as well. But essentially, one of the outline of the legal pathway that we've really summarized this down to is that when you are running group sessions, you essentially are inviting attendees in to provide a service. There's some sort of registration form that needs to happen. We're going to look at things like consent and privacy and how long you might store vaccination information for. And then there's also the sign-in, attendance register, and notification. So we have actually used this model, this four-step model, and overlapped it with the previous slide when we've looked at things like religious groups, for example, where they might have congregations that are coming in. We've looked at use this for mental health service groups as well too, in terms of what is the flow chart and what we call client flow chart, in terms of how they're actually managing people into the agency as well. But essentially, these are some of the key steps that we're going to be looking at. The other part that we are going to look at is around client screening, and this is going to be a big part of what you should be looking at. From a legal point of view, we do look at some of the privacy and also work health and safety obligations, which I'll come to in a minute. But essentially, what you do have is the capacity to actually screen clients, and we've done this with a number of agencies already. And essentially, we're going to walk you through this as well too. The screening tool that I will show you essentially links in with what we call the Gemba dashboard. And this allows you to actually run your contact tracing information. And just to show you what that looks like, essentially you can use, and this is just a test screen that we have in front of us at the moment. And from here, once you do complete this particular screening tool, you can essentially jump in, and I'll just open this up. Here it is here. You will find that from the time that you actually jump in, you do have access to the support desk as well too. Here we are here. This is Ruby, who's online at the moment and just saying hello. And essentially from here, once you log into your dashboard, and you've all got access to this dashboard from today as a single seat to be able to start to utilize and access the resources that we will give you today as well too. And from the QR code, essentially you've got access to the contact tracing module. And the contact tracing allows us to actually look at information that's here as well too. So I'll just close this chat down as well too. So here we are here. And essentially from here, you can actually monitor all of your clients that are coming in to your agency, and it gives you a one-stop spot to actually view this information directly, which we will come to as well too for you. And you can actually use this QR code that we'll show you as well too. So let's have a look. By attending this webinar, you should get a set of resources, timely resources that gives you the legal compliance obligations around running group sessions and also classes as well too. We will actually show you what some of the other agencies are actually doing that are meeting these compliance obligations, and also give you some case examples as well. As part of this, we will give you access to the Gemba 360 dashboard resources as well too, to get you started, and also load in other tools and templates that you can access for your agency as well. This webinar is being recorded all the way up to the Q&A part of the session, so you can ask questions in the chat group, as a few people have been doing this morning, and we will get those throughout the session. All of these materials are published on the Gemba 360 YouTube channel as well too, and all slides and materials and any questions that people do ask around COVID safety will also be circulated around to everyone as well too. So to access the other information, you can jump onto our website and look at the legal webinars at kaizensynergy.com, or you can go directly to the Gemba 360 YouTube channel, and we've actually loaded in all of our COVIDSafe legal webinars that we have run through since February last year, and there are a couple of hundred odd webinars that we have run as well too. With it, you will also get access directly to the Gemba 360 dashboard, which is a compliance-based system that allows you to run your COVID tracing and also look at vaccination registers and HR registers as well. And that also does include a series of COVID-safe policies that when you log in and have a look at the dashboard under Gemba Docs, and if I just simply type in COVID in the search bar, you've got a series of policy templates that we have updated. This does include checklists, cleaning checklists that we will talk about today, as well as also client forms that you can use as part of your group classes. And these are some of the templates that you can use. Just to show you some of these, when you click on, for example, the Word documents, if I bring this up, here we are here. Here's a sample vaccination policy. If I simply click on this link and you will get access to this, you can then open this up and it opens up into a Word document for you to basically be able to use these templates. And we do update these from time to time as the legislation does change. So let's have a look as part of this. Also, just a brief background, because we've got a lot of people joining us today for the first time. Our law firm, Kaizen Synergy, has been operating for over 15 years now. It is a law firm that I actually set up about 15 years. And since then, we have received a number of awards. Most importantly, was working with with not-for-profit and community service organisations, certainly over the last 12 months, where we have onboarded some 4,000 agencies. This has allowed those agencies, as I said, to access the resources as well too, and also get updates around managing their legal compliance obligations and also running their vaccine registers for all of their personnel within their agency, and COVID-safe forms for their staff and clients to use. So let's have a look at the A to Zs of running a community event. So broadly, we've divided this into three specific streams. We have the community events, where these are open to the public. We have the group classes, so things like also transport of clients into a group type environment, and also where client visits, where you might provide services into your own residential sites, or you're going and visiting a client at their site, particularly under things like mental health programs, NDIS programs, refugee type of services as well too, where you might, or even religious services within people's homes as well. So essentially, these are some of the streams that we've seen. So when we look at, and what we're going to look at here, is when you look at clients visiting your agency, or even if clients visiting your agency for the group sessions, then essentially there are a number of different areas that they could come or fall into. And this could be that they are fully vaccinated, whereby they've had 2 jabs. They might be partially vaccinated, exempt, not vaccinated, or be COVID positive. So this essentially raises a number of legal compliance obligations for you. Now, a couple of things that we can see people raising in the chat groups is, yes, clearly that when you start to run group sessions, you might have clients that might be, if you say you've got possibly 5 people coming in for a group class, then you might have 5 different types of, what I'll call types of clients, essentially coming in. You might have someone that is fully vaccinated, you might have someone that's partially or exempt or not vaccinated. And essentially, what do you do? So clearly there are, when we talk of public health orders, firstly, under various public health orders and roadmaps, people receive directions from the Chief Health Officer, or if you're in South Australia, this comes from the Commissioner of Police under their public health directives, that essentially agencies are required to follow specific directions. However, for clients that you are delivering services to, where they are vulnerable, particularly in the Aboriginal and community services sector as well, or if people are coming into church for religious ceremonies as well too, or religious sites, then essentially you will need to start to screen people into your agency. And the reason that we essentially say this is, before looking at what services you're delivering, from a work health and safety point of view, there is a positive obligation on employers and also employees to ensure that the workplace is that you take all reasonable measures to ensure that the workplace is safe from COVID. And one of the ways that you do this is around screening clients. Now, as part of that, asking the questions around a person's vaccination status, again, it may well be that your agency decides that it's only seeing vaccinated clients. And one of the things that we talk about when we look at this and we provide legal advice to agencies is, before looking at group sessions, ask the question on whether you're going to or whether you have the capacity to actually deliver services to people that are not vaccinated. And what I mean by that is, what if somebody actually comes in and says, I am not vaccinated? Is that going to prohibit them from getting a service from you? Or are you going to liaise with another agency in order to make sure that that person is supported? And it's a question that your agency actually does need to consider before actually opening up and running these group sessions. And when we have provided legal advice to agencies to support them in their operations, that's one of the first questions that we actually ask them around, well, is there going to be a prohibition around this from you on what type of services you are delivering at this point in time? Once you unpack that, then the next part to look at is from a privacy and health records perspective. If you are screening people, and we see this particularly in mental health services, we see this in women's refuge services and refugee services as well too, where those groups are screening people to make sure that those particular vulnerable members of the community do have access to services, and it's not a significant challenge for them to get services. So as part of that, we have recommended that you look at updating your privacy policy to say you are screening people and how long you're going to hold on to the information for, what types of questions you are going to ask, and I'll actually give you a checklist of this as well too. And from there, it means then that your screening process in terms of meeting your work health and safety obligations is starting to be met. We've had some agencies that have also spoken to us and said, well, if people are not vaccinated, then our staff actually feel uncomfortable about actually seeing them. And so this is where some of the Fair Work vaccination requirements start to come in terms of actually working with your agency staff to ensure how you're going to manage this process moving forwards as well too. And the same thing goes if your staff or personnel or volunteers are actually going out to visit clients, whether it be in their homes or also if you are providing group classes directly there as well. The next part around this also to consider is that if you are, and we will cover this shortly, if you are engaging with another agency to provide group classes as well too, what does that look like? And it may well be that you do need to update your service agreement, and I'll show you what we mean by updating a service agreement or a contractor agreement to make sure that your agency is covered as well. So when we look at this and look at the outline of the legal pathway, essentially any decision to hold an event during the COVID pandemic, no matter how large or small, should rely on a risk-based approach. And the risk-based approach that we're seeing was actually developed by the World Health Organization. And essentially what we are seeing here is that we've divided these up into preventive measures and looking at what are the key requirements that you need to look at in each of these types of scenarios. So if you are attending a small gathering or an event such as a wedding, a party, or a sports tournament, for example, if your agency is running a community stall as well too, what are the precautions that people should take in order to protect themselves and others from getting affected? And essentially what we're seeing is time and time again about checking the regulations, staying home if you're unwell, and complying with 3 basic preventive measures. And so where we've picked these up into keeping social distancing, covering during sneezing or coughing, and essentially washing your hand, is that these are essentially where we'll actually map these into the work health and safety obligations. The same thing goes also if you're looking at planning the event as well too, and looking at things like, can you run these outdoors or indoor spaces? Can you minimize crowding by staggering arrivals and departure dates as well too? How many people can you enter within your event that you are running, and are you going to supply things like hand sanitizers, as well as also making sure that specific areas are kept clean as well. So when we're looking at the outline of the legal pathway, essentially what we are looking at is, firstly, is it allowable under the Public Health Directive? And so as part of these directions, if the answer is no, then you determine if your event is an indoor or outdoor event and calculate the maximum number of people that can come in at any one point in time. If the event can comply with the minimum requirements, then essentially you move on to yes, and you develop your plan, which we're working through with you now, and then essentially you can step through each of these directions from there. If the answer is no and it doesn't comply with the minimum requirements, then essentially you look at delaying or postponing the event until government regulations have changed. What we do see with these as we move forwards is that there are specific requirements that your agency needs to meet, and one of these is around the screening. Now, essentially what we have done here, and you can do this on your phone as well too, is essentially conduct the screening. Now, what does a screening assessment look like? Now, you can use the QR code as well too that I've got up on the screen to show you what one looks like. This is essentially a plugin that we have run, and it gives you a list of some of the questions to answer. So when we do look at this, it asks for your name, your phone number, and then essentially it asks you a series of questions. And you can complete this for us as well too. Now, keep in mind, if you do complete this, we will see it on the next dashboard screen that you will also run. So once you complete the QR code itself, it does connect directly to your Gemba document system. And under the contact tracing module, so where I've gone into here, for your group classes, essentially what it asks you is a series of questions. Now, the series of questions that it asks you is your name, your contact number, and also it does ask your vaccination status. And also, in addition to that, a few questions. And the few questions that we've actually asked here is, do you have have you had COVID-19, or do you have a cough, fever, sore throat, fatigue, loss of smell, or any of the other COVID symptoms? And also, is anybody else attending with you? Now, the reason that we ask these specific questions, as well as the vaccination status as well, is really for a simple reason. And if I go back to my slides, what we're seeing is that even if you do have the vaccine, you can still be a carrier. So essentially with it, what we are seeing is by answering the screening questions, it means then that the system will automatically send you an alert to actually say, hey, look, this person has had or has one of the COVID symptoms. And it could be quite simple as they've got a runny nose or fever or the like. So with it, once that happens, then you will get a notification on this. And you can actually see and go back through time around when people have actually done it. Now, you'll find on the form, if I just go back here, it doesn't have the date or the time. And the reason that it doesn't have that is that if I go into the form, you'll find that once you submit it, it automatically brings up the date and the time that it's done. And this is one of the historical ones that we've got. Now, as part of the screening, and why this comes in for your work health and safety obligations, is that for those people that don't have mobile phones or don't have access to one or the likes, then essentially having the register is what some religious groups have also done as well too. And so they've actually kept a register of information that they've stored as well. And essentially they're screening people as they're coming in to their group event. And what we've seen that's worked really well for agencies is that in some of the groups that we've supported, and this is where the case studies come in, for agencies like Rumballara Aboriginal Cooperative, and we thank Laurie Seville, the Chief Operating Officer, who's given us permission over the last 12 months to actually share what they've done at Rumballara, which is an Aboriginal cooperative based in Shepparton, and also Women's Housing Limited, where Judy Line, the Chief Executive Officer, Lena Tompkinson, the Compliance Officer, and also Lindy Parker, the Operations Manager, have done a similar sort of process as well too. And what they've done is actually run up their workplace registers. And the workplace registers means that if people are coming in, then essentially what they're doing is screening people as they are coming in to their sites. It means then that as people are coming through the doors with their QR codes, this is not just the government QR codes that you might have, but this is the agency QR codes that actually ask specific questions around not only vaccination status, but other information that they want to have. From here, it's being poured into things like that we'll cover shortly around their work health and safety obligations that they need to meet for their checklists, and also assessment forms that their agency needs to cover too. So essentially, when we look at community events and group classes, you may have had to look at things like industry plans, but these are often based for large gatherings, over 1,000 people and the likes. And often for agencies, it is just too much from a compliance point of view. Now, what we have suggested, and I'll just cover this off briefly, for agencies that are providing brokerage type of services or contracts with other agencies that are running groups on their own, essentially what we have here is a sample of a variation to a service agreement. So with it, the sample as part of this is that with it, we've actually adjusted that if agencies are delivering services, that they do have vaccination registers, and they're meeting all of their public health directives like your agency needs to do as well too. These are examples of force majeure clauses that we have inserted into different agencies' service agreements, and it meant that it's given them certainty around what they actually need to meet as well too. In terms of record keeping, which is the other part that we're seeing as part of the service agreements, it is a requirement from a document management, under document management laws, that again, you keep records of different agencies' vaccination status, particularly where they're delivering contract work for you on behalf of your agency. Now, within this, what we have seen again, and agencies say, why do we actually need this? Well, essentially, if you're an essential service and you're providing group classes to agencies, it might be under transport services that they're bringing people into your agency. It might be where you're bringing somebody in to deliver community-based services. Again, those types of agencies do need to ensure that you're covering them off from a contract point of view to ensure that you're managing their vaccination status, and also that they indemnify your agency for any loss as well too. Now, when we look at the roadmaps that you see, there are triggers that you essentially are looking at to essentially reopen. And as we move through, and this is just the Victorian one that we've opened up here, I showed you previously WA's one as well. So essentially and we're going to be looking at the roadmaps over the next 2 or 3 weeks for agencies across all of the different states and territories, and actually unpacking key and overlapping requirements. So what we're seeing is essentially people that are, and the way that the governments have looked at this is to say, right, once we hit the national 80% mark, 70% mark, what does this mean, and what happens and when? However, what we are seeing from agencies, especially community service organizations, is that while there might be this rate of, let's say, 80% or 70%, essentially your groups that you may well be seeing, there may well be a variation because of the types of populations that you're serving. We're seeing this particularly in the Aboriginal community organisations that we support, where some of the rates are a lot lower than this. They are catching up around those. But again, the exposures and risks around this need to be essentially managed appropriately. So as you're looking at the legal requirements for your agencies, essentially what agencies then turn around to us and say is what is the work health and safety obligations that we need to do, and what are the events and challenges that we need to look at as part of this. So essentially, let's boil this down. there are a number of challenges caused by COVID-19. So essentially, the social distancing requirements may still last in place while you're running these group sessions. So what do you think about? Essentially, if we're looking at this in another 6 steps, look at your state laws. Does our rules allow events and community gatherings or group classes to happen? Obviously, there are differences across the different states. Does the venue that we're running this community event at have a COVID-safe plan? Or is there an industry plan that we are running? Now, if your venue does have a COVID-safe plan, then it is something that you can adopt and actually run. You also need to look at what are the services that I'm running as well too. So what if, is it only for vaccinated clientele that I am actually providing services to? Or what if there are people that do show up that are partially vaccinated? Or how do I screen people that are unvaccinated as well too? And what if one of those persons turns around and says that they are COVID positive? What do we do in that circumstance? Can I maintain the rules of work health and safety at the venue? For example, social distancing and the required PPE equipment, if that is required as well too. What else do I need to consider? And also, what is my register of attendees and COVID-safe checks that I need to do as well too? So what we are also forwarding out is also the relevant safe work requirements. So these are things like that Safe Work have sent out already around the physical distancing rules, around checklists that will assist you to implement physical distancing measures at your workplace and also for group classes as well too. It does cover off quite clearly what are the requirements that you need to make, and also what if the 4 square meter rule is not reasonably practical, how can you still run these events as well too? And this does also include things like your hygiene checklist as well too. So after each group class, how do you and what you need to do to essentially keep your space COVID safe. And so when you go through each of these cleaning checklists as well as your registers, essentially what you are doing is meeting all of your group classes and legal compliance obligations as well. As I mentioned before, there are templates that you can use within your dashboard. You can jump into the Gemba Docs and you will get access to that today, which will give you a whole list of policy templates and checklist tools that you can also use as well. As I mentioned, the recommendations are to look at the screening registers for clients, staff vaccination registers. You've got your client assessment policies and risk assessment forms as well too. Over the next few weeks, we will be unpacking the roadmaps and also looking at specific agency obligations and operations as well. If you do have any questions, more than happy to stay online and answer any questions that you might have. If you are watching this webinar after today's live session, then by all means, please reach out to us on 1300 360 360, or you can email us at support@gemba360.com.